everyone. This is Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily here, and I am beyond excited to have David Gregory, who is not only the co-founder of Severin Films, but also the writer, or so not, rather not writer, but producer and director of Enter the Clones of Bruce, which is now on a 21-screen theatrical run. Believe you have 4 dates with Bruce Lee as well. Is that correct, David?
That is correct. We just left Los Angeles where we played the Draft House there. Tonight we're doing San Francisco. Thursday we're in Austin, and then this weekend we're in New York.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, so for all those watching this, please make it a point to get out to your theaters if you can. I believe it runs until the end of May across varying different cities. So if you can get a chance to see it in person, please do. But I know we don't have too much time, David, so I'm going to jump right into our questions. My first one is, what draws you to such obscure niches in kind of film and genre history?
Well, I've been exploring niches of genre film history since I was, a lad. So this is just an extension of that, really. I always wanted to find the weirder and the more wonderful corners of genre cinema, particularly horror, since I was very small. So this, and growing up in England, where a lot of this stuff was banned in the 80s when I was a teenager, it involved speaking to a network of like-minded people in order to get the best possible copy of a certain film that we couldn't get. So basically, I was lucky that I ended up being able to parlay that into a profession by way of working with Bill Lustig at Anchor Bay and then Blue Underground. And then I formed Severin Films, which now, there are several boutique labels and we're all doing similar work. And so
Right.
while we also go back and revisit the classics like opera, for example, which we've just done a 4K on, or Della Morte Dell'Amore, Cemetery Man, the kind of bigger titles for us. We also like to, turn over stones all over the world to find, cinema that's exciting, that hasn't been given this treatment before. And Bruceploitation in particular was the next box set that's coming out, the Game of Clones Bruceploitation collection, is something that came about because we just did a trailer compilation of kung fu movies, and I met Michael Worth, and his area of expertise was Bruceploitation, and it just immediately took me back to 1982 or whatever, after I'd seen Enter the Dragon, and I was like, I need to see more Bruce Lee movies, and I knew nothing else about him, and went to the martial arts section of the video store, and bear in mind that the martial arts section of the video store probably exists because of Bruce Lee. But they had to fill it with more than the 4 movies that he was in. And sure enough, there was various, other martial arts movies, but a load of them that starred Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee. And so therefore it was I would start renting them and then realize very quickly that he wasn't, Bruce Lee wasn't actually in most of these movies. And so I just kind of forgot about it until I met up with Michael Worth. And then I was like, I need to. I want to know more about this Bruce Lee guy. I started looking it up, and there wasn't really that much information, certainly not in the English language, about how he felt about being a Bruce clone, And so that's why after the Lost Soul Dr. Moreau documentary and the Blood and Flesh Al Adamson documentary, I was looking for the next subject that could warrant an actual feature film as opposed to a special feature on a disc, and quickly became obvious that this was it. So off we went to Hong Kong and Taiwan and South Korea and started tracking them down and shooting interviews.
Well, I mean, for one, I know that these documentaries are kind of like, to me at least, they're like comfort food, and that they appease kind of two of my hungers. One of them is a hunger for history, and the other is a hunger for genre. And so I feel like Severin has definitely become kind of this go-to resource to not only create boutique label items and collector sets and remasters and restorations, but has also become kind of its own production arm in that it's creating a series of documentaries that are taking the work, what I imagine be quite difficult work of trying to compile subject matter experts and people who have firsthand experience with some relatively niche, films, actors, productions. So how do you go about finding these subject matter experts? When you think about, right, we're going to do a Bruceploitation film, how do you find Bruceploitation experts beyond Michael Worth?
Well, the interesting thing about this one in particular is, unlike Al Adamson and Lost Soul, I knew very little about the subject when it started, other than that peripheral kind of story that I told about knowing that they exist. So I did an interview with Michael specifically about bruceploitation and realized it was just so much more sprawling and
Yeah.
widespread and fascinating than just some guy gave himself the name Bruce Lee. That's not how it happened. You know, usually it was the producers and the distributors who actually did the most exploitation
Right.
aspect of it. So that again was like, okay, there's going to be a lot of different aspects to this that we can approach. And but having Michael Worth on as a co-producer, and then also Frank Zheng, who grew up in Hong Kong, he was able to actually coordinate finding the actual people in Asia for us to interview. And then Mike Leader, for example, is another martial arts movie expert. He's based in Hong Kong, so we were able to sort of get him to give more of an overview as well. And Stefan Nug in Paris is kind of
Yeah.
the French Michael Worth. He
He was
also,
impressive.
yeah, he'd written a book on Bruce Lee, and also is a martial artist himself. So he's extremely passionate about it. So that you know, they were experts. Well, what I found out, and I didn't know when I went in, is that France is the second biggest territory for martial arts movies
Huh.
outside of the US, exporting martial arts movies, I should say, outside of the US. France was a massive market, so it does actually make sense that that bruceploitation expert would be in France. So you know, these things just kind of blossom when you get started and you find more and more people to talk about it.
I mean, it almost feels like, I mean, I'm 38, so I grew up in a time where getting access to horror in the US wasn't super difficult. But as your tastes kind of mature and age, you start to want to explore outside of what's familiar. So I
Yes.
remember having to order bootleg copies from Asia to my local comic book store because there were only people that were importing films from outside. So it's almost as if you've cultivated that same sense of community for these documentaries, and that you're focusing on a very niche group of people with a very specific set of expertise, and they're all kind of known to each other, but to the broader world, they may not be, or at least until you put something together like this.
Yeah, and
Um,
isn't it fascinating that there is, you know, an actual expert historian or scholar
yeah,
on a niche like this, and there is, and you'll find that that is the case on a lot of the niches that we explore. Like even in folk horror, there are people
yeah.
who have specific areas of the world where their expertise is, you know, and it's you just have to do some digging and you can find them.
Well, I mean, I'm still digging through the Penda's Fen essay companion that was provided. It's
Yeah.
because it's very dense material, but it's also one film that, again, ignorantly wasn't aware of until the box set. But
Yeah, not many
um,
people were. That's
no,
the thing. It wasn't even that big of a, it wasn't like it was a cause célèbre when it aired on the BBC or anything like that. But like it seems to be typical of folk horror. It's one of those films that's just kind of grown as years have gone on.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty in collecting these days is that you get access to far more than you ever did before. And, you mentioned that you didn't have much of an understanding of this particular bluesploitation genre before. You were aware of it, but you weren't fully immersed in it. Thinking back, kind of putting yourself in that state of before, what's an appreciation you've gained through this filmmaking process for this particular niche that you didn't have when you started?
Just the expertise and dedication of the people, of the actual performers involved. I mean, I sort of assumed that was the case. You can't just be any old person and be impressive in a martial
Right.
arts movie. You've got to know martial arts and you've got to have a certain fearlessness in order to be able to execute certain things on camera that you don't get in other cinema. Um, but no, I that was one of the reasons why I wanted to find the actual people to get their opinion of it, because I'm like, were they sat down and did they say, hey, we're going to come up with this idea to imitate Bruce Lee? Like, how did that happen? You know, particularly as they were at such a young age when they started, the
Yeah.
like Bruce Lee and Dragon Lee, and sure enough, that's the case. And they're bittersweet about it, particularly Bruce Lee. You know, he didn't really want to be known as a Bruce Lee imitator. He actually found the
Yeah.
idea kind of disgusting, because and they all idolized Bruce Lee as well. So they had no intention of doing anything disrespectful, but just by the very nature of what some of these films were, and the very nature of the fact that they had to make a living, they had families to feed and that sort of thing, that they would continue doing some of the less reputable versions of these films just to continue making a living and continue working. So yeah, that was very interesting to find the sort of human side of the people and their actual, feelings about it. And that was one of the things that was also challenging about the film, though, because I had to tell sort of these three life stories within the bigger framework of this 10-year movement, which kind of
Yeah.
evolved in its own way and had different lives in different countries and all kinds of different aspects. Like a lot of it was not that the performers weren't even aware they were in a Bruceploitation film. That was just the way the film was
Yeah.
marketed. Karate, for example, didn't know he was called Bruce Lowe when he was in the Tiger's Claw. When it was released in the US, they changed his name to Bruce Lowe, and he had no clue. So it was fascinating. A huge amount of elements went into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that still persists today, right? We see a lot of exploitation, albeit kind of far more subtle, but especially in the horror genre, where we're seeing now an explosion of cartoon or his fairy tale characters that are now becoming slasher heroes. So this idea that we can repurpose, it might be good for a fictional character, but I also understand the human element, which is, your identity has now become attached to a persona that is impersonating another one. So it
Yeah.
does kind of, I'm sure, create and I think to your point around the film focusing on these three human stories, it does take, you do see the struggle that they have with being one, getting kind of the chance to participate in these films, but at the same time, the struggle of like, this isn't me, this isn't my identity or what I'm trying to carve out for myself. Where's my legacy? So I think, if nothing else, folks that might be on the fence about watching this because they may not be aware of the films. I think that's what you go to is you go to this for the human stories and connections about how they got involved, why they're involved, and also what it was like to put these together. I mean, was there anyone that you had on your list to talk to for this film that you didn't get a chance to? Because you talk with so many folks across the martial arts industry, and some of them are so gracious, with their time. So I'm wondering, is there anyone you didn't get a chance to talk to that we would have liked to?
Well, the obvious two actually. One is Jackie Chan, who basically they were trying to make him a
Yeah.
Bruceploitation actor. One of his early starring roles was New Fist of Fury, so they were making him that, putting him in that, casting him in that mold, and he didn't like it. And thankfully, the audience didn't like it either, and he went off and pursued his own career with Drunken Master, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, and then the rest is history. But so I really wanted him to tell sort of that part of his story, but we couldn't even get close to him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Andre Morgan who was the Golden Harvest producer at the time, he's able to tell that part of the story for us. Someone from the Bruce Lee family, it would have been nice to get their opinion of it, because I'm sure it was quite harrowing for them
Yeah.
as it was happening in the 70s. I mean, they were like, what the hell? This is they're definitely diluting the image of Bruce Lee at this point, because there wasn't that much information about him at the time. You couldn't hop on the internet and find out more about Bruce Lee, so it was very confusing that there were so many unofficial Bruce Lee movies out there. Another was Bolo Young, who was in
Yeah.
more Bruceploitation movies than anyone. He was the Bolo in Enter the Dragon, and he just made it seem like he was morning, noon, and night. He was on a different Bruceploitation movie or different martial arts
A
movie in
different martial
general.
arts movie.
Yeah, exactly. That guy never stopped working, and my God, is he a screen presence, But
Yeah.
but no, unfortunately, he doesn't do interviews, and certainly not about this. So we couldn't get him. But for the most part, it was my main goal was to get the three main Bruces and Bruce Lung, who was the fourth clone, still living. So once we got the first two, Bruce Lai and Dragon Lee, and then we also got Bruce Lung, we weren't actually able to get Bruce Lai for several years. I mean, we started this
Wow.
7 years ago, Enter the Clones of Bruce, and we didn't get him until close to finishing the movie, when we actually showed him a section of the film which was about him. but other people talking about him, and we sent it to him, and then he was like, "Oh, okay, I'll do it." And that's when we went to Hong Kong again, filmed the interview, came back and cut him into the film. And now, funnily enough, he's the one
Yeah, he's
who's
touring with you.
championing it more than anybody. He's the one who's here with us in the US. But I mean, I think he was skeptical about what our
Sure.
intentions were. I think he might have thought we were, laughing at them, or ridiculing them, or and to some extent they're like, oh, I've got to, I thought I'd discarded
I
this
thought this is
Bruce
gone.
Lee thing, but I mean, he still calls himself Bruce Lee on his latest movies, so that's not. It's not like he's completely distanced himself from it, but he does consider himself, quite rightly, a filmmaker and a producer in his own right. So maybe going back and looking back on that stuff wasn't what he wanted to do at that time. But now that he's seen it and been a part of it, he's right on board.
Well, I think it's, again, the film does, and all of the documentaries you've done before have treated material the same way, which is it doesn't apply judgment. In fact, it just tells an objective story about experience. And I think that's what resonates most with fans of genre is that they get a chance to see an intimate side of something that to them has largely just been on a screen and presented to them in a manufactured and highly produced way. So seeing what's behind that, I think is far more interesting. And I think, it's exciting to hear that Bruce Lee came around after
Yeah.
seeing the respect you all put in the material. I've got a couple more questions for you. I mean, I could go on for days, to be quite honest. But when can we expect a volume 2 of the Bruce of the Enter the Clone set? Because I know we got
Well,
a volume
the
one.
Game of Clones Bruceploitation Collection Volume 1 is not actually out yet. It's not out until next month. And I can tell you that it's been a real uphill battle to find
Really?
elements for these films, or the correct rights owners for these films. The two things you really need to start on a restoration process. You need to find the owner so that you have the legitimate license, and you need to find a film element that you can actually restore. And a lot of these films were just thrown away back in the 80s, when after they transferred them to tape, they just got rid of the negatives, or labs closed down and just chucked away all the film elements in the labs and stuff like that. So more so than any other country that we've worked with over the years, and there's been many, the Hong Kong film industry and Taiwan, they don't seem to have retained materials on these films at their national archives. They're not considered, what they would store at the National Archive. So that's been a real beast. Sometimes we have to use a release print from South Africa, to and try and restore that. But those things are in, if you've ever seen like kind of a cliched martial arts in a grindhouse print, they're in very bad condition.
Yep.
And that's what they are, So, they've been restored to an extent. When we've got one that's at least the complete film, or at least almost the complete film, then we can transfer it and we can do digital restoration and color correction. So we managed to actually get a good selection of films for Volume 1. And I can say that we have more than enough for Volume 2, and that's currently being worked on, but it's probably not going to be until early next year.
Yeah, well, I'm already getting myself excited for it because that's just how I get about these sets now. And my last question for you is, when you think about the legacy that you want Severin to leave behind in the film in genre and industry, what do you want this to be, it all to be known for?
Um, I don't know. I guess to be known for actually kind of contributing to expanding the notion of what genre cinema is, because it's generally considered something that's kind of the lower end
Sure.
of the film industry, and not the kind of stuff that deserves to be restored and preserved. But I disagree. Other labels like ours also disagree. These are the films that we think should have the attention and the light shone onto them. So that's really what we want to do. I mean, we had somebody in the Severin Cellar, which is a series we do, kind of like the Criterion Closet, where we bring filmmakers in to pick their favorite discs, and I think it might have been Travis Stevens who talked about how like it's a film school education,
Yep.
watching these films that you've never heard of. But not only do you get the film in the best possible presentation, you also get a bunch of context around it from the filmmakers and from scholars and all that kind of thing. I do hope that continues to be the perception, because that's certainly the aim.
I would say that, from my perspective at least, I believe the mark that Severin and similar organizations will leave in this world as preservationists is that they've taken the time to actually preserve films that otherwise would have gotten forgotten. And those are other people's legacies left behind. So you all are essentially in the business of preserving legacy.
Well,
And
it is funny that because as genre people and collectors, we are way more obsessive than the
sure,
average film fan.
yes,
And so therefore, I sometimes joke that in the future there is actually going to be more first-hand information on the cinema of Jess Franco than there is on the cinema of Fellini or Antonioni. There already is. I mean,
yeah,
you know, there's look at Stephen Thrower's books. I don't know that you have the equivalent about, you know,
no,
so it's
no, you
so
don't. I mean, you
basically
have
we're
a
actually as time goes on, you know, and after the nuclear war, after Threads happens, that's when the aliens are going to come and they're going to be like, wow, this Jess Franco guy must have been really important to these guys.
yeah, I can't wait to see, them screening Christopher Lee, Night of the Bloody Judge or something like that, Night of the Blood Monster as kind of their cultural reference for human beings. But um but David,
That would you see that would be a legacy worth sticking to.
right, right. I mean, just the old Christopher, I mean, all the Jess Franco stuff, but in general, I think what you all are doing with Severin is continuing to ensure that everyone has access to high quality films of all different kinds. Having you all just put out Cemetery Man, Del Morte Del More, which is something I've been holding on to my DVD for what feels like forever. So thank you for doing that. But
Pleasure.
I just want to remind everyone watching this that Enter the Clones of Bruce is making its tour around the country today. 21 dates going until May 31st. If you aren't able to catch it on screen, you can pick up Enter the Clones of Bruce on Blu-ray on the 21st, along with the box set. And you can also see it on VOD ahead of time on April 30th. So please get yourselves out there, check this out, however you can. And David, thank you so much for joining us and having a conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you.